Okay, good evening, everyone. I will call to order the City of San Carlos City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting this February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone out there. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we'll move on to item 3, changes to the order of the agenda. Jeff, anything from staff this evening?
Nope, no changes from staff this evening, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Any changes to the order of the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to presentations. I'm excited tonight to present 2 proclamations. First, I'll present a proclamation recognizing February as Black History Month. And I'm going to go ahead and read the proclamation. It says, whereas African Americans have played a significant role in our nation's history, and whereas since 1976, Black History Month has been observed nationally to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments Black Americans have made and continue to offer this nation. And whereas Black History Month is an occasion to become more knowledgeable about Black heritage and to honor the many Black leaders who have contributed to the progress of our nation, and to rediscover the enduring stories of African Americans and the gifts of freedom, purpose, and opportunity they have bestowed on future generations. And whereas it is also a time to commemorate the countless contributions of African Americans, many of whom lived through and surmounted the scourge of segregation, racial prejudice, and discrimination to enrich every fiber of American life. Their examples of heroism, patriotism, and enterprise have given people of all backgrounds confidence, courage, and faith to pursue their own dreams. And whereas this year's Black History Month theme is Black Health and Wellness, acknowledging the legacy of not only Black scholars and medical practitioners, but also their ways in which the Black community have contributed to healthcare throughout the African diaspora. And whereas the City of San Carlos is strengthened by the diversity of ethnic, cultural, racial, gender, and sexual identities of its residents, all of which contribute to the vibrant character of our city of good living. Now therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Sarah McDowell, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, on behalf of the entire City Council, hereby declare and celebrate the month of February 2022 as Black History Month throughout the City of San Carlos, and urge our community to join together to actively promote the principles of equality and liberty, presented this 14th day of February 2021. And so tonight we are joined by Eugene Whitlock, San Carlos resident, UC Berkeley's Chief of People and Cultural Officer, and one of the Foundation of San Carlos's community member Spotlight for Black History Month. Eugene, welcome, and would you like to say a few words?
Sure, very briefly, that proclamation was quite comprehensive. I just want to add a little bit to the history of Black History Month. It actually started back in the 1920s as Negro History Week. And as we know, a lot of these holidays start out just as a week. And then over time, they started to get the ball rolling. College campuses started picking it up early in the 60s. And it officially became a holiday in 1976 under Gerald Ford. And by that time, it had become a month. And the other point I would like to make is that this is a celebration. It's not, focused on the negative things. It's focused on the positive contributions of African Americans. And for the African American community, it's a time for us to celebrate ourselves and our contributions to the United States. So it's a time to be happy. Just want to make sure everybody knows that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Those are great words. And I also wanted to add that the Community Foundation of San Carlos has a wonderful webpage right now dedicated to Black History Month. Lots of resources there, stories from members of our community, book and film recommendations, and suggestions for how to support Black-owned businesses. So I would encourage the community to check that out as well. Any comments on the proclamation from my colleagues? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to our second proclamation of the evening. which is condemning anti-Semitism. And I'm going to go ahead and read that now. Oh, Crystal, should I take public comment on the first one?
I don't see any hands, so I think we're good there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Whereas anti-Semitism remains a serious and growing danger for Jews in the United States and around the world, and whereas anti-Semitism is the centuries-old bigotry and form of hate faced by Jewish people simply because they are Jews, often involving the use of stereotypes and myths. And whereas nearly 1 in 4 Jewish Americans said they experienced anti-Semitism in the past year, according to a study released on October 25th, 2021 by the American Jewish Committee. And whereas according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, nearly 60% of religious-based hate crimes in 2020 targeted Jewish Americans, who make up no more than 2% of the US population. And whereas according to an Anti-Defamation League report, 2,024 anti-Semitic incidents were reported nationwide in 2020, the 3rd highest year on record, and 289 incidents occurred in California. And whereas education, compassion, and cooperation are key to unlocking understanding and embracing differences between people, and whereas the city of San Carlos is strengthened by the diversity of ethnic, cultural, racial, gender, and sexual identities of its residents, all of which contribute to the safe, welcoming, and vibrant character of our city of good living. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Sarah McDowell, Mayor of the city of San Carlos, on behalf of the entire City Council, hereby condemn anti-Semitism and urge our community to join together to condemn acts of hate toward any and all persons, and to reaffirm our commitment to building an inclusive and equitable community for all. And tonight, we have with us Tyler Gregory, CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council. Tyler, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure, and thank you so much, Mayor McDowell, and also Council Member Parmer Lohan for working with our team on this important issue. This means a great deal to the local Jewish communities. Jewish members of San Carlos go to Peninsula Temple Shalom, Bethel, Sinai, the JCC in Foster City, and are a vibrant part of the community. This has been a challenging time. We saw the Colleyville, Texas hostage situation, which, on one hand looks like it's something happening on a different part of the country. And the reality, these incidents mean local consequences. And so we were pleased to be able to work with the local police department and make sure that our agencies had the proper security that they needed. But the reality is we don't want to have to be in a situation where we need to erect walls around our houses of worship. Our Jewish tradition teaches us to welcome the stranger, and moments like this run counter to our Jewish values. We brought together about 50 Jewish organizations as a part of our Jewish Community Relations Council work to talk about common understandings of anti-Semitism today. And I just want to share a couple of them with you. Number one, different Jews experience anti-Semitism differently. Orthodox Jews are visibly Jewish in many ways. They have Stars of David necklaces, they have kippot, and they're often on the front lines of this conversation. You talk about Black History Month, very important, and I echo Eugene's words. Jews of color, African-American Jews, experience anti-Semitism at the intersection of racism and anti-Semitism. So different Jews have different types of experiences with anti-Semitism. Another key point to consider is that Jews and Jewish identity are being increasingly conflated with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that's not a political position. That's to say that, like our Asian Pacific Islander neighbors, who at the beginning of the pandemic were scapegoated for something happening overseas, so too are Jews being scapegoated for a conflict on the other side of the world and being asked to have litmus tests and entry requirements based on our position on a foreign policy issue. And lastly, the last one I wanted to mention is that, anti-Semitism is something that's found across the entire political spectrum and is amplified and most extreme on both political extremes. And so, yes, when we see people chanting things with tiki torches, the Jews will not replace us. When we see neo-Nazis in this country advancing white supremacy, we have to call that out. But we encourage everybody to think about casual anti-Semitism and how it creeps into the mainstream of our society. So we want to thank again the San Carlos City Council for taking this important step. And we hope we can be partners in you as we make this a more just and inclusive city that we all care about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks very much for those words. I too wanted to thank Councilmember Palmer Lohan for bringing this idea forward. And now I will open up to comments from my colleagues, and then we'll see if there's public comment. Crystal, is there any public comments on this proclamation?
No, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone being here tonight for these important proclamations. We will move on now to item 5, council communications and announcements. Do my colleagues have an announcement that they would like to share tonight? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have one item. I'm on the Caltrain electrification task force, and we had a meeting last Thursday. Just wanted to update the news on our electrification of Caltrain. Full passenger service, which they call revenue service, is slated to begin in the fall of 2024. You may have seen some poles going up in San Carlos. All the foundations have now been installed. That's 3,092 of them. There's still about 760 poles that remain to be installed. So as you drive up and down the peninsula near the tracks, you'll probably be seeing more. But it is progressing. It is on schedule. Caltrain, though, is still looking for another $350 million to finish the job. Some of the good news is that ridership is finally up to 23% from where it was at 4 or 5% during the pandemic. And I also asked Pranaya, who is now the head of the electrification for Caltrain, to get in touch with our staff, because I'd like them to give us an update on a report to council in the upcoming months. So hopefully that will be scheduled in the next few months. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I did want to just report out to council that on February 4th, Vice Mayor Rack and I participated in a 2+2 committee meeting, which brings together 2 city council members and 2 school board members and the respective staff. And we had a very productive meeting on a wide range of issues, including safe routes to school walk audits, the Samtrans bus routes, budgets, and mental health awareness. Okay, seeing no other comments, we will move on to item 6, public comment. If you would like to make a public comment on items not on the agenda, now is the time by either going on to Zoom or calling in. Crystal, is there anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, I do see 3 hands at the moment. First up is Daniel Villasenor. You should be able to unmute.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
What's up, guys? My name is Daniel Villasenor. I lived in San Carlos all my life. I'm the one who's been working with y'all about more concerts and murals in San Carlos. I just kind of wanted to give an update of what I've been up to. So I've had the chance to work with like Amy from Parks and Rec and Caitlin and Tyler on potentially having a Burton Park concert. And the Burton Park concert would be really, really cool. All ages, outside. Gonna be working with Greg Poston too to get like sound system, everything sounding good. Only concern with that is that, we're not clear on how it would work yet, but it does seem like we wouldn't be able to solicit for tips. And that is kind of a bummer because I would like the opportunity to pay the artists and people involved. And then also because of that, vendors who are obviously my age might not get the chance to sell some of their art. We're also looking at the youth center for a spot to throw shows, and that would be really cool, but it does seem like it would only be for kids 18 and younger, which most of my friends, that wouldn't be them. And I also just want to push for me to be able to continue having backyard shows. They really mean a lot to me and the people who attend them. And it does feel like if I'm getting pushed out of my own backyard, and I'd really like to work with the city to figure out something to continue having this music community and to also encourage other kids to have their own shows and build up the safe space, because there's really nowhere else in the peninsula where kids can go to an event hosted by kids just like themselves and just listen to music and have a good time. So yeah, happy Valentine's Day, y'all. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Next up is Scott McMullen. You should be able to unmute.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Madam Mayor and council members and others. I'm speaking tonight to reintroduce you to an amazing local nonprofit called Villages of San Mateo County, with the mission of helping older adults to continue living in their own homes as they age. You might remember our grand opening ceremony of Sequoia Village, our first village, 7 years ago at Frank Harrington Park on Laurel Street. In fact, then Mayor Ron Collins spoke at that event. Thank you, Ron. Since then, we have grown significantly, now serving over 250 seniors in 3 villages in a broad section of San Mateo County, stretching from Millbrae to Menlo Park and from Pacifica to Pescadero. Over 400 volunteers have been engaged during this time. They provided 7,000 individual services to seniors in 2019, pre-pandemic. And surprisingly, the number of services changed, but actually grew to about 9,000 as we adjusted during the pandemic. 2 years ago, we began a partnership with Each Green Corner, another fantastic San Carlos nonprofit, to grow vegetable gardens in the yards of local seniors. And this year, we have partnered with 2 local Rotary clubs, CID of San Mateo County, and the San Carlos Age Friendly Task Force on a medical equipment loan program. We are offering used medical equipment in good and clean condition at no cost on a loan basis, much like a library checkout system. Equipment includes wheelchairs, walkers, and other items. My public comment tonight really is just a teaser for that program, because 2 weeks from now, you will hear from members of the San Carlos Age Friendly Task Force describing their work, including this as one of the projects in their age-friendly efforts. For now, let me just say that I am over the top excited about this program. I believe it can become the premier source of free, without restrictions, durable medical equipment in San Mateo County. So stay tuned on that. For more information, you can call Villages of SMC. You can Google us. Thanks for listening tonight, everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. And looks like our last hand is from a member of the public with a phone number ending in 863. You should be able to unmute by pressing *9. Oh, and you just lowered your hand, so I think that has been canceled. So there are no other hands at the moment.
Thank you, Crystal. Okay, we will move on to item 7, consent calendar. Does anyone have a desire to pull an item from the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through F, and item G, adopting ordinance number 1577, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, amending ordinance 1363 for the planned development zoning district for the property located at 1129 Old County Road, APN 046-171-150.
Second.
Thank you. Crystal, would you please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to item 8, reports to council. Tonight we will be receiving a report on the results of the community benefits survey for the East Side Vision Plan conducted by True North Research. I see Al is here. Al, did you want to tee us up?
I do. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And so what I'd like to do, if we could go to the next slide, Crystal, what I'd like to do is back up just a little bit and refresh our understanding of how we got to where we are today. And as you recall, as part of the recently approved Eastside Innovation District Vision Plan, a community benefits framework was developed to help us identify how new projects in the district could achieve broader community and citywide goals. And even before that, I think if you look back at the City Council's strategic objectives, what we have found in years past is that there was a discussion in the community based on various community engagement that the city had done and what the council was hearing. And so your strategic objectives, even before the vision plan was created, was reflecting some of the ideas that have come forward in the vision plan. And you'll see things here such as affordable housing and childcare. And so there was alignment, I think, after we had that vision plan completed, there was alignment between your strategic objectives and some of the things that we see here on this slide. And in particular, some of the things that you see on the lower left-hand corner of the slide in that hatch red line there, you'll see some of these new ideas that came up in our visioning engagement. And so in 2021, the San Carlos Community Benefit Survey, it was really conducted to build upon the district vision plan's extensive community engagement and the dialogue around these community benefits, and to further clarify and inform our decision-making moving forward in negotiations as they pertain to some of these large developments on the east side. And so you'll see that what the intent was of this community benefits survey is to kind of get more clarity on these issues from the community. In particular, you'll see some clarity on some of the things in the lower left-hand column of the vision plan framework here. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Timothy McCleary. Timothy.
Thank you, Al. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Dr. Tim McClarney, president of True North Research. And tonight we have a few slides that present the highlights of the survey results that we conducted for the city late last year. There is a slightly more detailed report that is available if you want to dig into the details. And as I go through these slides, I welcome questions from council as I go, or at the end, whichever is your preference. Next slide, please. So before we talk about the results, helpful to take a quick moment to talk about the methodology. One of the advantages of doing a survey like this, ideally, is that you can step back from it and have statistically reliable understanding of what your community is interested in. As Al mentioned, oftentimes you do a lot of workshops or community engagement exercises, and you get a lot of great feedback, and there's people who show up who are interested and want to share their voice. Sometimes, though, when you through that process, it's nice to take that what is more qualitative feedback and then bounce it off a random sample of your residents, so that you have, an understanding of how what you're hearing from a qualitative perspective lines up with what you're hearing when you go out and actually talk to a statistically reliable sample of your community. And so that's what this process was designed to do. We use what's called stratified random sampling to select almost 900 residents. We wound up completing 899 interviews among adult residents in your community. We use what's called a mixed methodology approach. It used to be back in the day, we'd recruit people by phone and we do all the interviews by phone. Now we're using 3 different recruiting methods. We'll reach out by email, we'll reach out by text, and we'll reach out by telephone to individuals who were randomly selected in the sample. And they have the opportunity to take that survey either online or by telephone. I will mention that anyone who's recruited has kind of a unique number that's assigned to them. That way, we make sure that only San Carlos residents can take the survey, and that they can only take it one time, right? And so it sort of protects the integrity of the study, and we can manage our sample that way. Once we're through that, by the way, we take a look at the sample demographics, we monitor them closely so that they wind up matching what that profile is of your adult residents, so everything lines up. This was a shorter survey than we normally do for the city. It was to the point and focusing on their ideas for what types of community benefits might be prioritized as part of the vision plan, and so it was just 7 minutes long. Now, because this was a random sample of almost 900 residents and not a census of all of your adult residents, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. That's about plus or minus 3.2% in this case. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results I'll share with you tonight are within 3.2% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your adult residents. Next slide, please. So on to the results. Right at the beginning of the survey, we asked individuals to tell us, how they would rate the overall quality of life in the community. Would they say it's excellent, good, fair, poor, or very poor? Overall, as you can see here, San Carlos residents have a high opinion of the quality of life in the city. We had 91% who use excellent or good to describe the quality of life, 7% who said fair, less than 2% who said poor or very poor. When you look behind this pie and you break it down by age, by gender, by ethnicity, by how long they've lived in the city, where they have children in the home, all of these different demographic subgroups, what you find is that this high opinion of the quality of life in San Carlos is widespread. We had, across all of those various subgroups, all of them had at least 83% of residents rate the overall quality of life in the city as excellent or good. I will also point out, though, it was interesting, newer residents and younger residents under 35, as well as those who identify as mixed ethnicities, were the most likely to describe the quality of life in the city as excellent. It's not often that the younger residents do that. Newer residents is pretty typical, but to have younger residents also rated high is a little atypical. Next slide, please. So after that question where we asked them to rate the overall quality of life, we went on to say, if the city government could change one thing to make San Carlos a better place to live now and in the future, what change would you like to see? This question was administered in an open-ended manner, meaning that we didn't provide them with the list of options you see there on the slide. We simply asked them to tell us in their own words what they would most like to change about the city to improve the quality of life. We went back and reviewed those verbatim responses and grouped them into the categories that you see here. So at the top of the list, 14% limit growth and development. You had about 12% who said they weren't sure, nothing really came to mind. It's also worth pointing out that when you take that number and you add it to the 6% who said no changes, everything's fine, you get almost 1 in 5 respondents who nothing really comes to the top of their head of what they'd like to change about the city. And in some ways, that's the ideal answer. That means there's really no burning issues out there that they think need to be addressed. Some of the other items that came up, though, is reducing traffic congestion, improving sidewalks and bike lanes, providing affordable housing, and then improving parking issues, so on down. Next slide, please. So after those kind of warm-up questions about the overall quality of life and what the city could do to improve the quality of life, we got right to the heart of the matter. And this question was prefaced by letting respondents know that there are several large development projects proposed in San Carlos. And although property owners are entitled to redevelop their properties, to balance the effects of development, the city requires developers to pay for improvements, facilities, and amenities for the community's benefit. And that the city would like to know how they would prioritize among potential improvements, facilities, and amenities. And then so for each one of the specific items you see there on that slide, we simply ask folks to tell us, should this be a high priority, a medium priority, a low priority for the city's future? Or if they aren't interested in having the item in San Carlos, just say so. And to introduce a sense of competition, we said, please keep in mind that not all things can be high priorities, right? Most of the things on here are beneficial. And so if you just said, would you like them? You'd probably get a lot of yes, 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 yes. And at the end of the day, that's not going to be very helpful because you're not going to be able to do everything. And so we purposely introduced a sense of competition so that individuals would prioritize among the items you see here. So in the aggregate, what you see here is at the top of the list, sort of three to four items kind of jump off from the rest. Downtown beautification, right? Improvements such as landscaping, trees, wider sidewalks, and plazas. That was your number one, along with additional trails and walking paths and outdoor gathering spaces for community activities and events. You can see all three of those had 2/3 or better of respondents say it's either a high or a medium priority. And that was following right behind that was additional affordable housing. And then you've got a tier of what I would call sort of second tier projects there, additional child care centers, community swimming pool, joint performing arts community center on down. When you get to the bottom, you got a skate park checking in on the very bottom there, and then right above that, artist studios and maker spaces. One of the things about this list is there are some items that are a little narrow in terms of their intended user. So skate park, for example, right? Not everybody's going to be out there skating, or at least shouldn't be, at least at my age. And so, that has a little narrower appeal. Whereas some of these other ones like trails and walking paths, certainly have broader audience for those type of improvements. So if you go to the next slide, sometimes we do these types of studies where we're asking folks to help a city prioritize among, a variety of projects they could fund with future discretionary resources. And the results are a little muddy. And what I mean by that is you get an overall ranking, but when you dig into the rankings, what you find is it's really a collection of very different opinions across different subgroups. So, certain subgroups like certain projects, certain subgroups like the other projects. And it's a little challenging to kind of find areas of consensus across all your residents. This is not one of those surveys that comes back muddy. This is one of those surveys that comes back with a remarkable amount of consistency across your resident subgroups in terms of the types of projects that they prioritize. And so what you see here are the percentage who identified high priority for each one of those items. And what we've done, and within each column, we have highlighted in green the top 5, right? And so age here, you can see that, for the most part, those top 5 projects are consistent across age. You get a little variation where your younger demographics, under 35, additional childcare centers kind of pop up. Makes sense, right? That's your more typical age group when it comes to having young children who would need childcare. And then your 25 to 44-year-olds, they like the cafes and restaurants, and so they'd like to see a little more of that there. But still, again, you can see that the green tends to kind of cluster up towards the top of the chart. One of the other things you will see, though, just real quick, because it doesn't show up in the green, is you can see that there's under affordable housing, if you just kind of read across the row there, you can see affordable housing is strongly related to age, right? Although it's a top 5 priority for all groups, the younger you are, the more that becomes a priority for you, right? And at the extremes, affordable housing is only 22% who rate it as a high priority if you're a senior, but if you're under 25, it's 66.5% as a high priority. Next slide, please. So here it starts to become even more clear that the top 5 projects are the top 5 projects sort of across the board. So in terms of ethnicity, you don't see a lot of variation in the top 5 projects. Same thing with presence of a child in the home. Next slide, please. Length of residence is kind of an interesting one. Again, the top priorities tend to still stay those same 5 projects. But if you here again look at affordable housing, you tend to see that, the longer you've been in the community, the less interest you tend to have in affordable housing, right? Or view it as a high priority. If you're new to the community, it's a different story. With, anyone under 5 years in the community, you have about half of folks saying that this is a high priority. Next slide, please. Home ownership status, obviously affordable housing is related to that. And so you see that variation of among owners, about 26% mention affordable housing as top priority compared to 63% among renters. And then here again, if you look across perceived quality of life in the city and gender, the top 5 projects are still the top 5 projects. Next slide, please. So recognizing that list of projects that we tested was not exhaustive, right? There might be some other projects that we didn't think of that the community might want to share as being for consideration as a future project to be funded through this vision plan. We gave folks the opportunity to tell us, is there a project that I didn't already mention that you think should be a high priority for San Carlos's future? Here again, open-ended question. They got to tell us what came to mind. Most folks, as you can see at the top of the list, 60%, nothing in addition to what we'd already tested came to mind as a high priority for the city. Beyond that, it tends to be scattered across a wide range of improvements, maintaining existing infrastructure, providing more rec centers, improving sidewalks, crosswalks, and on down. And so next slide, please. With that, I end my presentation. I welcome questions from council if there are any.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I'll open it up to questions. I see Councilmember Dugan first, and then we'll go to Councilmember Collins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And Dr. McLarney, could you go to slide number 6, please? And first, thank you. Very comprehensive survey and report, and obviously very glad to hear 91% of our community feels we have an excellent or good quality of life. So we should all pause and take note of that. That's a really nice piece of data to have. So thank you for that. On slide 6, high priorities, how can you just, I think you mentioned it, but I didn't quite get it. This was a list that you had prepared that they were presented with, or was this also an open-ended type questioning?
This was a prepared list of items. So they were asked about each one as we went down, and they could assign it a high, a medium, a low priority, or tell us that they didn't want this in San Carlos in the future.
Okay, and then how did you come up with what was on this list? I mean, I look at slide 5 and I see, you know, the open-ended inputs. Did you look at the open-ended inputs before you created the list of priorities, or was this all done at the same time?
No, when we sat down to design the questionnaire, this was a back and forth between, I think there was a list that staff had created originally with a variety of items, and I took a crack at kind of putting them into what I thought were logical categories. And then as a subcommittee, we got together again and refined that list to the list that you see here. So it was staff, subcommittee, and myself.
I see. Because what I'm trying to understand, so I see downtown beautification, you know, rose to the top there. That's great. We have an active project there. But when the open-ended input from our community, I see sidewalks, bike lanes, as far as what's actionable by the city directly, that's pretty much the top of the list. The other items, if you can go to slide 5, when you look at limit growth and reduce traffic congestion, a little harder for us to directly impact those. But I see sidewalks, bike lanes, and then housing at the top of the list. And I'm just kind of curious, how can I read slide 6 knowing that bike lanes and sidewalks are a top priority? Like, where do those appear in slide 6? Or is that not really, we really didn't ask about sidewalks or bike lanes?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. The way to look at slide 5, and this comes before we get to slide 6 and the question that is slide 6 represents, right? So we open up with a top of mind, hey, if we could change one thing about the community to make it a better place to live, what change we'd like to see. And what you see on this slide is the answer to that question. And so you're right, you have about 8 to 9% of folks who mentioned, something about adding or improving sidewalks or bike lanes, right? You have about 9% who mentioned providing affordable housing, et cetera. If you go to the next slide here, let's take affordable housing there, because that affordable housing item came up as about 9%, right, in the open end. When you get to this question, you ask, okay, how high of a priority should affordable housing be? Well, you can see here that additional affordable housing is not 8%, right? That was just top of mind. You get to mention one thing, the last slide here. We get to go through this entire list and they get to rank that priority, right? So here you see affordable housing comes in, at about 60% of residents say it's a high or medium priority. It just wasn't top of mind for more than 9% of respondents when you ask them to give you one answer, right? So where the bike lanes might come in, we don't have the bike lanes on this list. It wasn't asked as part of this list, so I can't compare. But presumably, you're going to get more than 9% of folks say that that's a high or medium priority if you give them an option for that, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I just, it doesn't surprise me at all that sidewalks in particular and bike lanes were on that open-ended. And I guess I'm just, I wish we had asked that more directly under the priority list, because that has consistently been perceived as a priority. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Tim, for the presentation. A couple questions. I'm glad you left that slide up. I think maybe it was the one before that where it talked about infrastructure. I didn't see any specific questions about repairing roads or road quality. does that just fall under general infrastructure?
I think, and again, I don't want to speak for the subcommittee or staff, but my sense of that is, when you talk about, those are things that cities are going to be doing, right? You're going to be repairing your roads over time. It's kind of like saying, having police. You're going to have police, right?
Sure.
My sense was when we got to the questions that were in Q4, which was that other slide, these are all things that you don't necessarily have to have, right? And are sort of discretionary, in my understanding, sort of would need to have funding to be able to make realize, and kind of fall squarely under this notion of community benefits that you might be able to negotiate with developers for and have some sort of nexus to their projects, as I understood it. So it's certainly not meant to be an exclusive list from which you couldn't, do something else. Right. But it has to be a manageable list, and that's kind of the list that the group came up with.
Okay, thank you. I know that this was more or less of a focus survey, given the Eastside Vision Plan and that sort of thing. But you've done these surveys for us, for years, and I'm wondering if there were any interest, rankings that changed, any that came up or went down that you might have noticed from prior surveys?
We only have one question that's kind of in common, which is the one that's here on the screen, right? The whole priorities list, that was new for this vision plan study. We don't have a comparable list like that in another survey. But, we do tend to ask these questions about what's the one thing you would change to improve the quality of life in the city. I don't have that answer offhand. I can certainly look and get that for you. I can tell you sort of more broadly, concerns about affordable housing have in most communities generally risen, right? So you can see here that comes in about number 5. That's something that has been climbing the charts in a lot of communities. Kind of makes sense. You actually, interestingly enough, just as an aside, again, maybe not so much as a relation to yourself in the past, but if you look at San Carlos in relation to other communities, this request for sort of improving sidewalks and bike lanes, that is usually not a top 4 in a community, right? And so there seems to be a lot of interest in active transportation in your community, more so than we might typically see as sort of top of mind in other communities.
Yeah. Okay. My last point is not really a question for you, just an observation that I'd like to point out to my fellow council members, that on slide 7, if we built a child care center at a community pool, we would hit all 5 age groups and we'd hit all the ethnic levels, and they'd all be in green. So something to think about.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Tim, thanks for the presentation and for the work on it. I just had, I guess, really one question. If we went to maybe slide 6 and to start with, and so understanding sort of how this is structured more about kind of what community benefits we would see to kind of help inform us. I guess when I see the community center, right, and Performing Arts Center has at 50%, but then when they talk about what we missed, if you go to the next slide, they talk about I think you mentioned somewhere in the rec centers, or maybe it's the next slide.
I think it's probably at the end of these tables.
Right. And so I guess I'm just wondering sort of how we frame that, because understanding sort of what community center is versus a rec center because I think there's some stuff that's kind of interchangeable when it's maybe not, almost like we needed a little bit more explanation about what could be what, right? Something could be more encompassing. And so if people were feeling like, we missed something, right? I don't know. I'd be interested in your thoughts around that, because to me, community rec center then ties into community center. And so maybe there was more priority around that. We just phrased it wrong or something.
Right. So it was phrased as a joint performing arts community center, right? And so what I think what you were seeing here on this slide is you have a certain percentage of your residents who would go, Well, that doesn't sound like a recreation center, right? Like that doesn't sound like, that it handles those types of activities, right? And so they're mentioning it here as, well, I'd like to see that, right? Now it's possible, I have certainly seen joint use facilities that they're Park Performing Arts, their Park Community Center, their Park Civic Center, and then they have a rec wing, right? And so you're right. I mean, if that's what's envisioned, then it's possible that might, broaden the appeal of that particular item.
Sure. Okay. And I just think like there's a couple, that's helpful to kind of frame it, because I do see a couple other items like on this list, sort of the open space one might tie into the trails, or you might look at improved restaurants and shopping areas. Maybe they look at beautification of downtown as a different way to improve that. I'd be curious kind of what that meant, what was that meant to be if they want to improve restaurants and shopping areas? Is it more about they'd like different businesses coming in, or they want to, what that?
I think it's more about the look and feel of it. I mean, when you look at the way the description was, it's downtown beautification and improvements such as landscaping, street trees, wider sidewalks, and plazas, right? So that sounds real pedestrian friendly downtown, that's been, that's been also kind of, updated. So it's more appealing visually.
Right. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you for that. And I just, my last sort of, I guess, question / comment, and maybe it's more of a comment on this, and I'll just say it anyway. I would personally be curious about sort of what, surveying sort of the youth of this community as well, to understand kind of what they desire as well. I think it's great to get the 18 to 64, 18 and older group, or, but, what are the, and maybe, what are the high school kids, or what are the 12 to 18 or 17-year-olds? What would help improve their quality of life? What would they like to see, so that we have a little more comprehensive viewpoint into that? Just a thought around. I know that wasn't inclusive in that survey, but I just sort of throw that out to staff and my colleagues. I'm happy if you have comments on it, go for it. But so you may have experience that said it's a difficult thing to do, but just a thought. And thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it can be done. It is difficult. It obviously, to survey anyone who's not an adult, you wind up having to get parental permissions, and they're hard to locate. And so oftentimes it's, you have to kind of tap in and work through the schools to do it. So not impossible to do, but definitely kind of a different animal than when you're going out and doing a survey of adults in the community, like the approaches that we're using here.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, we'll move on to Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. Good discussion on the survey. This is a kind of a slightly different question, and that has to do with, and maybe this is for Al to talk about, following this report, what is the go forward process with respect to negotiating with developers? Because again, this exercise was done to help us understand what the community was looking for in the way of benefits. So could you talk about that?
I'm going to refer that question to our city manager. Jeff, would you like to weigh in?
Thank you, Al. Can everybody see me? I can't see myself for some reason.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for asking that question, Council Member. The go forward, we're going to be receiving a proposal from Alexandria, which will likely be our first development agreement. While they're working on their proposal, we've got economists analyzing the project that's been proposed from the city's perspective to determine overall value and potential for public benefits in regards to the development agreement. And then we're going to sit down and try to negotiate a draft agreement with them for council to consider. And when we do that, we're going to be utilizing the East Side Visioning Plan, the city strategic plan, this survey, other surveys that the city's done to help, inform us in terms of what the council and community's desires and values are and what they'd like to see accomplished with any additional funding that could be realized through a development agreement by the city. Once we have that draft agreement ready, then we'll bring it back for the council to take a look at and comment on and try to get it into its final form after that.
Great, thank you. And I know that Tim McLarney provided us with, some perspective on the demographic variability with respect to the answers and the priority, but, digging a little bit deeper, I do see some, very interesting observations with respect to priorities. So, for example, in addition, with respect to affordable housing, so that skewed higher with women. Women were more apt to cite the need for affordable housing in our community, as well child care centers. And then there was some other demographic data that popped on some of those elements as well. And I'm just wondering as we move forward, and again, Jeff, this might be for you, I'm not sure, but we've talked about making sure that equity and inclusivity are, key components of our vision and mission. And, to what degree will those factors play into these discussions as we move forward with developers? Because, once you kind of average everything out, childcare kind of starts to fall to the bottom. But for some community members, right, it's a really acute need.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it's probably actually really a question for you and your colleagues, because you're going to be faced, not with just one decision, here's a development agreement and we're done. But there's, as in many things you do, lots of different decisions that have to be made in association to, individual specific projects like childcare, transportation demand management, a lot of other things that really tie into equity like that. And the council has already commented several times, and the subcommittee has commented that, you'd like to make sure that affordability and inclusivity are addressed, with childcare centers and those types of benefits. You've been sensitive to, if down the line, say a community center or an aquatic center or, public theater were created by the council through this process. You've already established a number of programs within policies within your Parks and Recreation area to help with affordability if somebody's income level bars them from participation. And those will be areas that you'll continue to touch in the future. So I think as in the past, as in the present, so will be in the future. Inclusivity and equity will continue to be important to the city, so long as it's important to you and your colleagues. And I know the city council has made that a real priority.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohan. John and Adam, I see your hands, so I'm going to pop in and have a couple questions as well, and then I'll be sure to call on you guys. So just to clarify, so Councilmember Palmer Lohan and I sit on the Economic Development Subcommittee and had quite a few meetings over the last several months on these surveys. And I just wanted to, maybe Al or Jeff, could you, there's been several questions tonight about infrastructure and bike lanes and sidewalks, and that's certainly something that we discussed as well. But it was my understanding that those improvements in those areas are labeled as a baseline requirement. And so we could see those improvements being made just more automatically by these development projects. And really these survey was intended to gauge interest in benefits that kind of go above and beyond. And could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, let me talk to that one, Al, because I think your statement is correct. In regards to the projects, you've identified them as baseline, although that's probably, as a baseline requirement, that's really having to do with the area of the project or, the general vicinity and neighborhood that the projects take place in. And I think in terms of Councilmember Duggan's question had to do with, well, what about, sidewalks and in areas in other parts of the city that maybe are as far away from the project as you could get. Certainly, I don't think the council had talked previously about dedicating, funding from development agreements for those types of projects specifically, but that's certainly something you can consider down the road within your budgeting process the last several years. And again, in this year's update, in the past, the council has increased funding for both streets, sidewalks, safe routes to schools, and pedestrian and bicycle master plan projects. And I think you'll have the opportunity, I know you'll have the opportunity to look at further increases in those areas for next year's budget. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
And then my second question has to do with kind of these top 9 community benefits that have kind of risen to the top. And I kind of picture them in my head as like a basket of community benefits. Could you explain, I know that, I'd like to kind of talk about expectations in the public about how these things could possibly come to fruition. I know that a lot are top of mind for many people, and, this basket of community benefits over the horizon, can we expect to see progress on several of them?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at this. The first project in front of us that's furthest along is the Alexandria project at the old Kelly Moore site. And as the council, and I think the community at this point is aware, there are lots of other potential projects and a number of other potential development agreements to be negotiated as those projects sort of mature in their application process and we get to that point. So this isn't just a one and done process. I believe we'll have quite a few of these. And in fact, this could, what the work that we've done on the East Side Visioning Plan, the survey work that we've done, all the prep work that we've done, and we'll continue to do survey work in the future. So your comments in terms of how we can better survey the community were great, because that'll continue to go on. This will likely go on for, the next decade. And so, while your top priorities may get more attention in the beginning as you begin to accomplish those things and check them off the list, you'll move further down. So I think there's a likelihood that a number of these things will come to fruition over the coming decade in our city as this development moves forward and turns into a reality, and then begins to be a paying partner for the community.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Dr. McLerney, can you just go back to slide 6, please? Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question. As I'm staring at this list, I want to be careful what our takeaways are. Obviously, I'm a fan of improving our downtown, but in your experience, was that first priority, the downtown beautification? I mean, was that I understand the process was you and staff kind of sat down and worked on what this list would be, but is that a fairly worded question in your experience? I mean, when you read beautification and improvements and give a list of things, it's kind of easy to glom onto that one as opposed to a skate park or a community swimming pool. And maybe that was just the best way to word it, but, do you think we might have tipped the scale a little bit the way that one got worded?
I actually don't think so. And having done this, I think it's like 1,200 times now for public agencies, I usually am trying to be really careful. If I ever see an item that looks like, hey, this is going to get an easy yes from everybody because it sounds wonderful compared to the other items on there, I kind of would point that out as we're talking about it. Frankly, I'll be honest, I was surprised that this item came to the top of the list because in most communities, if we were to stack that up against, say, if some of the other items on here, particularly the trails, it's just not going to rank, right? And so I don't I don't know if perhaps people's experience in the pandemic and wanting to be more, active and walking and hiking and biking I know that in some communities they've blocked off some corridors to make, to sort of simulate a more pedestrian friendly area, and that's become very attractive to some residents. I don't know if that's what's playing into this or not, but I don't think it's artificially at the top of the list.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I'm glad that's your opinion. I do wonder how the community swimming pool would have done if we had let Councilmember Collins work on that wording a little bit more. But fair enough.
Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate all the dialogue and all the comments, and I appreciate the mayor clarifying also, because one of my questions was we kept referring to the subcommittee, and I wasn't sure if it was the economic development or the focused on the east side or where that was, so it's helpful to get that context. I guess I just want to, and this is sort of more in the request side, but want to understand maybe from Jeff, from a process standpoint, as we sort of take this data and we kind of get through the list that he taught, we sort of Jeff talked about, we could get through, a bunch of items on this list. But obviously projects are coming at different times. So, you may say the community swimming pool is I'm going to say I'll just throw a number out, a $25 million project. We may not get all of that from Alexandria. So how do we sort of put that process in place? Can we sort of put funds aside to say, this is going to be a larger, and we're going to take $5 million from Alexandria, we're going to take $1 million from this project? Or I guess I understand sort of that process in a little more depth. And it could be that maybe this is something that we have as a separate agenda item at another meeting to kind of talk through, because while I know you've sort of done things traditionally with one project at a time, we're sort of in a different time period right now over the next 10 years, right? We've got all this development happening at once, the development in the Harbor Industrial Area coming next. And so we're going to have a significant pool of resources to kind of look at versus, hey, we've got this one project and we're going to get X dollars from that. So I almost want to look at sort of this bigger pool to help decide and inform us versus the one-off, because I think that's kind of what the division plan was supposed to inspire as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think the visioning plan did that in many ways. All those baseline requirements that are built into the visioning plan really help us with that. In terms of some of these special projects that are sort of one-offs, we certainly can have, we can, agendize another item if you want to talk about them further. It really would just be a matter of the council setting the priority. Now, whether you do that now or you do that later, it's not particularly important from my perspective in terms of what we, the staff, need to work on to accomplish for you. Because when we come back with things, we'll have quantified the dollar amounts associated. So, if we were to come forward and say, and by the way, we've got, $25 million in childcare identified here, and you might say, well, that's way too much. We don't want to spend $25 million on childcare. We want to spend $10 million on childcare, and we'd rather, see, 15 million divided up between, a swimming pool or theater and, more bike and pedestrian improvements around town or those types of things. But I think we have a pretty good, the council's had many conversations in different venues over the last 3 years. And I think we've really kind of got a good feel for what your, current priorities are and, and how we can begin to lay that out. And to the extent that, you're going to have some money that you can set aside, you'll be able to do that and identify. You could, say, set aside money for, your top 3 things, knowing that with multiple projects, you're going to be saving up and paying for them. So.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, so we'll go ahead and open it up to public comments, and then council members can have further discussion after that. Public comments is now open. You can join via Zoom or by phone. Crystal, is there anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, we do have one hand up from a member of the public. Carol, you should be able to unmute.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, City Clerk, for letting me speak. A little nervous. Sorry, I'm seeing the timer go by. I am very grateful for the affordable housing opportunity at Walnut Studios, 817 Walnut, and I commend the City Council and all parties that were involved for this. I was first notified after 8 years of being on the affordable housing list with San Carlos. So I've been on the list for 8 years, and I was just notified in September of this opportunity. And I have to tell you, I'm quite horrified by the opportunity because I'm actually ineligible. I'm ineligible because I have an illness, and the illness is I need to cook. I need to prepare all my meals. I can never eat out. My illness developed 11 years ago. And that not one unit, not one studio in this development has an oven. It has a 2-burner stove top, all of the units, and all of the units have a microwave. You cannot cook, prepare healthy meals in a microwave, raw food completely. And I just have to say, I'm working with one of the representatives at the city's housing division on this issue, but not only for me, I actually don't want preferential treatment. No one who is quote unquote in need of affordable housing should ever feel deprived that they cannot, if they want to make this their home, that they cannot have an oven to cook in. And I'm really horrified that this was such an oversight, not only for accommodations in terms of disabilities, but for anyone. Imagine, we often have more empathy for children than we do for adults who are in need. But imagine this is a studio that can accommodate 2 people. That could be a mother or a father and a child. Imagine a parent on a fixed budget, otherwise they wouldn't be looking for affordable housing, not being able to have an oven. And I was told by the manager or the compliance so-called manager when I was interviewing, she said, oh, there's a 2-burner stove, but of course they'll have, this is back in November, there would be an oven. Turns out, she said, oh, I made a mistake. She just notified me this after 3 months of paperwork and much money that I put into the application and time. She said, oh, it turns out there's no oven. And none of the units have ovens. I said, well, I told you I have a disability. And what about all the other individuals here who deserve a place to live? And you don't want to create an atmosphere of vagrancy in the city. People looking around, they can't even, in their home, it's not really a full home. And
Thank you, Carol. Your 2 minutes have expired. I will ask staff to follow up with you, and I appreciate you bringing this to the council's attention this evening.
But please know it's for everyone.
Thank you. Crystal, is there anyone else in the waiting room?
There are no hands for this item.
Okay. I will open it up to council discussion now on this topic. Is there any further guidance or questions for staff? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have to say, I'm kind of surprised. It never occurred to me that we would build affordable housing units that don't have an oven. I guess I need to know more about that. And the next question that comes to mind is that we're about to embark on a very large project with HIP Housing. I'd like to know whether or not is that the model? Was this an exception? I think we ought to talk about it at some point. I mean, I'll just talk offline, but I
have questions too. I'm just a little concerned that our city attorney is going to say that this is not agendized as a topic.
I know,
and
I have to be careful what I say, but anyway, I just express my surprise.
Jeff, is someone on staff able to respond to Carol and perhaps report back to the council on this issue, please?
We will absolutely do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ron. Okay, so East Side Vision Plan Survey, any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, study session. Discuss lobbyist registration ordinances and provide direction to staff. And it looks like our city attorney, Greg Rubens, will be presenting tonight. Greg, you're on mute.
I just sent it. Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you for allowing me to present this tonight. This came up from a council agenda setting, and it's on for a study session, so you're not going to be making any decisions tonight on this item. My review of the subject matter revealed that put in place by other cities in California, mostly cities larger than ours, and in our county, there is not any that I could find an example of, but there are others in the Bay Area and Santa Rosa and across the Bay. Most of them have a registration requirement of some sort or another to require someone who's attempting to influence legislation in the city, and legislation is defined in most of these ordinances as just something that's before the city council or before a city board or commission. They have to register. The fees can range. Usually they're relatively small, but we can figure out what the cost of the program is and determine what an appropriate fee is, and we can charge less than that for such a fee. And one of the issues of the cities that have a great deal of regulation, including identification, gift limits, and quarterly reporting requirements, is that makes the program more expensive and cumbersome to operate. And I think that's one of the reasons larger cities tend to do this, because they have more activity in that, and they have a more ability to absorb the cost of operating the program and obtaining the expertise to review all the reports. One of the things I think, just looking at it, the simplest ordinances just have a registration and a updated reporting requirement. So if someone who's a lobbyist who's been hired by a developer or someone trying to influence legislation would come, and the developers themselves would be required to register the people that they've hired to influence the legislation. And then if theoretically they might not have somebody at the time that they applied for their development project, so we would have an ongoing reporting requirement. If they did hire someone later in the process, they'd have to register them. Typically, they have exemptions for news media and groups that are not really in the business of influencing legislation, but and because of First Amendment considerations as well. So that is kind of my basic summary of what I've found, and I think I'm available for any questions you might have. I put 4 examples that I thought were in your staff report of the different levels of regulation that you might be interested in pursuing.
Thank you, Greg. I will open it up to questions from my colleagues now. Vice Mayor Rath.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Greg, thanks for the research and the work on that. And I think just to clarify, because I believe this is an item that I brought up back, I think in August or whenever the time frame was that we talked about it. And for me, the focus was much more on the development projects that are coming and the instances where we're lobbied by people around development projects, or those individuals are maybe speaking at a public meeting, and the need to sort of have some sort of identification of that or registration of that. So I was almost thinking of something more even, and maybe this is not as simple, as simplified as when there's a development agreement in process, or when a project is sort of at some stage in the development process that staff can determine, or we can determine, that they list the person if they do have any paid consultants around that. And then when the report comes up that we're approving it, that is listed as well in the staff report. So I don't know that because I agree we're sort of in a smaller town, smaller city. It's going to be, I don't want to overburden staff around this, but I would like to sort of increase some of the transparency around some of the development projects that are coming. So it's my long-winded way to get the question of, is something around that, something like that, more streamlined possible from an ordinance standpoint, or would we have to go to sort of a larger, more sort of full registration?
I think we could have, we could pick and choose among the, or develop our own type of program that is something simplified and something as you're describing. It's just, I would want to bring back something that is enforceable, and sure, something that we can point to as an ordinance, so that we would put it out there for the general public, or people who hire lobbyists, the bigger development community would know about this, and then they would self-enforce, and hopefully we wouldn't have a problem. But if we had somebody at the planning commission, it's probably where we'd find out at the low, and we'd have to ask them that question if they were, if they hadn't registered. But typically the enforcement mechanism for these types of ordinances is sort of a blunt instrument. I mean, I would probably send a warning letter to somebody that we thought was representing somebody for compensation, and then ask them to register. And if they didn't, then there would be some penalty under our code. And you might recall that the violation of a municipal code is a misdemeanor. Well, many times our code allows, in my discretion, to reduce something to an infraction, but I kind of take it seriously to see what the issue is and how intentful it was, if you know what I mean.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. That's the only question I had.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. So I'm not sure if this is a question for Greg or Adam, but I heard Vice Mayor Rack talk about the fact that he was intending this really just for lobbyists who work for developers. It is true that there's a lot of different advocacy organizations, right, where lobbyists do come in and that type of thing. So is it even feasible to so narrowly define it? And, I guess, why would we do it just for one group and not others? Wouldn't we want to have greater transparency? If this is something that we're going to move forward with, wouldn't we want to have an understanding if somebody's a hired lobbyist in all cases versus just developers?
Madam Mayor, can I answer from my end on that question, or I'm happy to, I don't want to,
We'll hear from Vice Mayor and then the City Attorney.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer Lohan. I'm flexible on that. I don't know that I've been sort of lobbied as much on non-development projects in this community, but I'm certainly happy to look at a broader range of that and just understand kind of how we define certain things. Because then, do we, or would we require the chamber to register because they're maybe advocating on behalf of the business community more broadly? But I think we just have to, I was trying to draw a sort of brighter line and a more narrow definition, but I'm certainly happy to do that. I mean, I'm registered as a lobbyist from the federal government side. I don't find it very onerous to do, and I think it's good from a transparency standpoint. So if that's the direction the council wants, I'm certainly supportive of that.
And I think Councilmember Rack touched on the issue of exempting nonprofits. Many cities do that, like so the chamber would be considered a nonprofit, even though they may be taking a position on legislation of some sort. And you're right. I mean, there may be legislation that affects the public generally, that you are being lobbied by professional lobbyists, but I think community people are pushing it. We've had, for years there have been a couple of gentlemen and women who've been hired as to help advocate for projects. And so that's what I've seen over the years. But it doesn't mean that they're not there because maybe I'm just not noticing them in other areas.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is I'm just trying to understand the problem that we're trying to solve with this, just to have greater understanding. So it's more of a curiosity at this point. So I'm just not clear on that.
I can answer my experience with that, and then I'll be quiet and let everyone else. I feel like I've been in council meetings where people have spoken on behalf of projects, and they are being paid to advocate for those projects, and yet they're not sort of identifying that they're that they're paid consultants for that project. And I think it's sort of not transparent in that standpoint. And so that was the reason I brought that up, was the need for more transparency around that and disclosure.
Thank you, Adam. Or Vice Mayor Rack. Still getting used to it.
You're fine. You're fine.
Either way, he goes by both. It's okay. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I guess just a quick question, probably for you, Jeff. And I appreciate Vice Mayor Rack's perspective that we do have a lot of development coming. So maybe we're not, the smaller city that we think of ourselves as in the context of, several $100 million worth of development coming. So I don't want to be naive and think we don't have to look at this. But I guess I would just appreciate your perspective, Jeff, since as your experience, you've kind of seen these cycles over time. Has this been a problem of any kind in the past? Has there ever been a perception of people not properly disclosing who they're representing, or is this in the past, have you seen this be an area of concern, and would you anticipate it being an area of concern as we consider these much more significant projects over the next 10 years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I can only answer that from my unique perspective. I mean, from the staff perspective, it's not really an issue because, our work, when we're working on applications is with companies and their staff and representatives. So it's always clear to us who we're working with. But through the lens that's been raised in terms of public meetings, I certainly have seen, in different projects, somebody come up and speak on behalf of a project that, hasn't said I'm working for company X as I'm, and that's why I'm here speaking to you in support of this project. So I know that has occurred, not just recently, but I can recall it, occurring at times, going, far back. Whether or not the council was aware, communities members were aware or weren't aware, I don't know. I think you all are probably in a better position to sort of weigh that. Is it a problem? It's a problem if the council thinks it's a problem because you're not getting information and you feel like you're making incomplete decisions, then, we want to help you address that. Do I think like in general, it's having a problem on the outcome? No, probably not in that regard. Is there potential for problems? Always, when money's involved and other people, and this is not the city's money, but other people's money, there could be a tendency for somebody want to try to break the rules and unduly influence elected officials. I don't think any of us could say that we haven't seen that happen or aren't aware of that happening in our country's history. I'm not aware of that having ever happened in our community, but it's something we want to protect against.
All right. Thank you. That was a helpful perspective, Jeff. Appreciate it. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'm sorry, Adam, I'm having a hard time with this one. I think it's, I I think it's trying to solve a problem that really isn't much of a problem. And in 10 years in the council, I can only think of maybe one or two instances where we had somebody who was advocating on a project that they didn't tell us about, although it became evident based on what they said. I just wonder if this is something we can't solve another way. I could envision the mayor making a statement before public comment that simply says, if you're speaking on behalf of a project in which you have an interest, please disclose that. Now, are people going to violate that? They might, but if any of us have a problem with it, or based on the comments that they're making, we decide at some point that it sounds a little odd that someone's advocating for a project with a certain amount of energy, or they seem to know more about it than a lot of people. There's nothing stopping any one of us from saying, by the way, do you have an interest in this project? Are you connected in any way? Are you a lobbyist? Are you a consultant? I think that's the way I would solve it. I don't know that we need to, have sort of formalized rules around. I know, Adam, that you work in a different arena, and this is something that you are keen to, and I appreciate that. It's just that I just think that there's a more simple way to handle it, and I think we can do that simply by just sort of setting the stage before we start taking comments on whatever project, whether it's development or otherwise. So I'd be interested to know how other people feel about that, but I really don't think that what we're trying to accomplish here is going to really do what we want it to.
Councilmember Rock, if you'd like to respond, that's fine. We do have public comment and then discussion time as well. So
I'm happy to wait. That's a good question. I'm happy to wait. Well, let me answer Ron now, and then there may be discussion. So I think that's an interesting idea, Ron. Something I'd be open to. I think my goal is more transparency around this. So if that gets us to more transparency in a simplified manner, I could be supportive of something like that, because I think to me that's the goal. I'm trying to make things difficult, add a lot of burden on staff, or try to create something that's not there. But if we can get more transparency, then I would be in favor of something like that.
Okay. Crystal, could we take public comment now? I'll open it up if there's anyone in the waiting room.
There are no hands raised for this item.
Okay. Thank you. I'll just chime in. I didn't have any questions for staff on this, but I'm willing to take the baby steps that Councilmember Collins discussed, and perhaps we can see how that works. And if we find that there are continued issues of transparency, then maybe we could look at, disclosing it as part of the developer application. I guess I could probably go either way. I think that disclosing it as part of the developer's application is, a good idea too. Councilmember Collins, Dugan, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just say that, I don't personally perceive it as a significant issue. I'm certainly attuned to Vice Mayor Rack's experience with this arena, and we do have some major projects coming. So I think it is good for us to pause here and just, make sure we're all thinking about this issue. So I certainly thank the Vice Mayor for that. I would, so I don't like the idea of, anything cumbersome around something that's not a significant problem. So if there is something less significant we could do, the baby step, as the mayor suggested, I'd be open to that. But I guess I also don't want to just pick on one one aspect here. As Councilmember Parma Lohan suggested, we get lobbied or potentially could be lobbied on any issue, and we shouldn't just be focused on developers disclosing who they're working with. Lots of people come before us with various interests and motives. So I would just say, whatever we do, I think we should do equally. And given that and the potential of unintended consequence there, I think I would most likely come out of, I'm glad we're talking about this. I'm glad we're raising our awareness of this. But I think I would probably be most comfortable not doing anything at this point.
I see Councilmember Parma Lohan's hand.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion, and thank you, Vice Mayor Reck, for bringing this up. I think I appreciate the kind of the spirit with which you raised the concern, Vice Mayor Reck, after our discussion and having been able to think about it a little bit. I would be open to a streamlined approach to getting some acknowledgement from professional lobbyists when they're making their public testimony, so that way we have a clear view of who we're talking to, so that we can pull that into our thinking and our decision making. And the method by which we approach that, I'll leave it to staff recommendation and preferences from other council members.
Vice Mayor Reck.
Thank you. I appreciate all the comments and thoughtful discussion around this. And so I'm happy to defer to staff too, as Councilmember Parma Lohan mentioned, because I was thinking back on a couple other non-development projects that we've had. So when we did I think it was potentially like the banning smoking in multifamily housing, we had the lobbyist from the California Apartment Association there, but she clearly identified herself as that was her role. That's why she was speaking. And I think it's helpful to inform the discussion. It's helpful to inform the public as well, that who is speaking when that discussion comes, if someone is speaking with some expertise. So so I like the idea after you brought that up of maybe being broader. And then also, I'm happy to take the baby steps as well, if staff recommendation is to kind of let's start with that and see how that goes. So, but I'm flexible and appreciate all the thoughtful comment. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands raised. Jeff, do you want to chime in here? Is it the staff bring back a recommendation, or do you want to work with the mayor who's in charge when they open it up for public comments, that we add a little extra comment, or where do we go from here?
Yeah, my thoughts are I'd like to talk with the city clerk and the city attorney about whether or not we might add some language to either the agenda or our public comment slide that we display that just states that as something additional for the mayor, and then we can circle back around with you and see if that is to your liking, and then kind of go from there.
Okay, that sounds fair to me, and I think we have Vice Mayor on board and Councilmember Collins, and anybody else want to nod their head? Yeah, okay. All right, I think we have agreement there. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so now we'll move on to item 10. Public hearing, consideration of adopting an urgency ordinance pursuant to Government Code Section 65858B, extending urgency ordinance 1576, imposing interim regulations and objective standards for the subdivision and development of qualified Senate Bill 9 properties for a period of 10 months and 15 days. Actually, I did want to just pause. We've hit the 90-minute mark. I just want to make sure this might be a long item. I'm not sure what public comment will look like on this item, but if anyone would like to take a break now, I would entertain that. Otherwise, we can continue.
I'd be good with a short break.
Yes? Okay. All right. Why don't we take a 10-minute break then, and we'll come back and take this up then. Thank you, everyone.
Crystal, I believe it's 8:44. Should I go ahead and proceed?
We're ready on our end.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and reintroduce this. This is a public hearing, consideration of adopting an urgency ordinance pursuant to Government Code Section 65858B, extending urgency ordinance 1576, imposing interim regulations and objective standards for the subdivision and development of qualified Senate Bill 9 properties for a period of 10 months and 15 days. I see we have Sajudi here. Are you going to lead us off on the presentation?
Yes. So good evening, Madam Mayor, council members, and San Carlos community. My name is Sajudi. I'm the Senior Management Analyst with Community Development. And tonight I'll be doing a brief presentation on the SB 9 Urgency Ordinance extension. Next. So we'll start off the discussion with some background information and then move on to a recap of Senate Bill 9 and then discuss the urgency ordinance extension and what it really means. We'll also highlight some of the tasks underway, look at next steps towards developing a permanent SB 9 ordinance, and end the discussion with questions and public comments. And our director, Alice Vey, will be moderating and delegating the questions portions of the presentation. Next. So this timeline gives us a quick glimpse of the SB 9 progression from when it was signed by Governor Newsom on September 6, 2021. Then on December 22nd, 2021, the Housing Subcommittee recommends the SB 9 urgency ordinance be brought to the full council. And then on January 1st, 2022, the new SB 9 state law became effective. And then on January 10th, 2022, City Council adopted the SB 9 urgency ordinance. Since then, staff held a joint virtual meeting with the Planning Commission and the Residential Design Review Committee to provide an update on the urgency ordinance, which was on February 7th. And then finally tonight, on February 14th, we will be discussing the urgency ordinance extension. Next. So as a reminder, SB 9 allows the approval of up to 4 units on a single family lot, which are RS3 and RS6 districts in San Carlos. And it also allows subdividing a single family lot into 2 lots with at least 2 units on each resulting lot. Now, there's no requirement for discretionary review or public hearings, meaning none of the SB 9 projects have to go through Planning Commission, Residential Design Review Committee, or even City Council review. Finally, it's important to note that certain SB 9 provisions actually supersede certain San Carlos zoning standards, such as side yard setbacks, maximum floor area, and lot coverage requirements. Next. So the San Carlos SB 9 urgency ordinance that was adopted on January 10, 2022 established interim regulations and objective standards for the subdivision and development of qualified SB 9 properties. The ordinance intends to ensure that the development of SB 9 projects are as compatible as possible with existing single-family neighborhoods with regards to parking, privacy, scale, and massing, but still meeting the state law requirements. As a reminder, for lots subdivided under SB 9, San Carlos's urgency ordinance allows 2 units per resulting lot with a maximum size of 800 square feet for all new SB 9 units, with no ADUs, accessory dwelling units, or JDUs, junior accessory dwelling units allowed. Now, according to the state law and the FAQs released by the Association of Bay Area Governments, under SB 9, a local agency, quote, shall not be required to approve, unquote, more than 2 units, including ADUs and JDUs, on a lot created via an SB 9 lot split. Agencies may also prohibit ADUs and JDUs on parcels created by lot splits that use the 2-unit provision. Now, given this language, local agencies could choose to limit the development on lots created by a lot split to 2 primary units. And so for parcels not subdivided under SB 9, the urgency ordinance allows 4 total units, including 2 primary units, an ADU and a JDU, with a maximum size of 800 square feet for all new SB 9 units. It is important to highlight that the urgency ordinance does indeed allow development of SB 9 projects and the submittal of SB 9 project applications, and if extended, will be used for guidance until a more permanent ordinance is developed and adopted. Next. So tonight's main discussion will be around extending the urgency ordinance. It is recommended that the SB 9 urgency ordinance be extended for a period of 10 months and 15 days from today's public hearing, which means if extended, the urgency ordinance will expire on December 29th, 2022. This extension will allow staff to conduct in-depth research to prepare a comprehensive permanent ordinance through public discourse. And even though staff is requesting 10.5 months, we do plan and anticipate to develop a permanent ordinance sooner than later. Now, without the extension, the urgency is set to expire on February 24th, 2022, at which point the state law would be the only governing document to regulate SB 9 projects within the city. This may lead to different interpretations of the state law, both from staff and potential applicants, and may ultimately result in disorganized SB 9 projects. Next. So why should we extend the urgency ordinance? Well, firstly, staff wants to involve the community on how to best address parking, privacy, scale, and massing in single-family neighborhoods through objective design standards, which I'll explain further on the next slide. We should also extend the urgency ordinance because, as stated on the previous slide, it will provide local guidance on how to approach new SB 9 related developments on single-family lots. And finally, the extension will allow staff to prepare a thoughtful and comprehensive permanent ordinance with robust public outreach and engagement. Next. So one of the main tasks staff will be working on during the extension is actually developing objective design standards that actually reflect the city's desire to maintain high design standards throughout our city and include the community in these discussions and conversations. So we will be assessing elements such as height. So that includes, whether we want to allow second stories at a 4 feet setback. It'll also include site design elements, including setbacks, landscaping requirements, and location of parking. We'll also review architectural features such as entryways, windows, lighting, and massing. And finally, we'll take a look at the hillside requirements such as grading, natural state, and front setback allowances. The underlying goal here is to really develop clear objective design standards, specifications, performance approaches, and graphic illustration that ultimately help streamline SB 9 projects through review and permitting. As emphasized before, throughout the development of the SB 9 permanent ordinance, we want to provide engagement opportunities for the public and stakeholders to provide comments and input. Next. So since the SB 9 urgency adoption on January 10, 2022, staff has been busy with various public education and outreach items. So last week, staff held a joint planning commission and residential design review committee virtual meeting where staff provided an overview of the key points of the urgency ordinance and informed them of the next steps related to adopting a permanent ordinance. While most of the Planning Commission and RDRC members focus on clarifications of certain provisions of the ordinance, there were a few public comments and one Planning Commission member who expressed concern with extending the urgency ordinance. In addition to the meeting, staff also updated the SB 9 City webpage with resources and informational links, along with a sign-up button for anyone who would like to stay updated. Also, for all SB 9 meetings to date, social media posts and e-notified blasts were sent out. And finally, there's now a designated staff person responsible for responding to all SB 9 inquiries. We've received 10 inquiries so far. Next. Other tasks staff is conducting related to SB 9 is continued research of best practices from other jurisdictions. Staff is also in the process of developing detailed handouts and checklists with SB 9 development guidelines, an SB 9 application, and an affidavit form to provide clarity to potential SB 9 applicants. Finally, related to the development of SB 9 objective design standards, staff is prioritizing single-family residential standards within the citywide objective design standards, or as we've been calling ODDS, Objective Design Standards Project. In fact, the citywide ODDS project should be coming to council for approval at the next council meeting. Next. So although the extension request is for 10.5 months, staff put together an anticipated timeline to adopt a permanent ordinance by October 24th of this year. So we plan to host a community workshop in April and start developing the objective design standards in May, working with our consultants, and then based on the community input that we get. Then we plan to hold a Planning Commission study session on June 27th, and then spend the month of July preparing and fine-tuning a draft permanent ordinance. Then in early August, we'll meet with the Housing Subcommittee to ensure we also capture their feedback, and then we'll return back to the Planning Commission on August 29th for their recommendation to the City Council to adopt the SB 9 permanent ordinance. Finally, we'll go to City Council on September 26th for the first reading of the ordinance, and then back to City Council on October 24th for the second reading. Please note that community outreach will play a very, very important component throughout the process of adopting the permanent SB 9 ordinance. Next. Meanwhile, we encourage the community to get involved by signing up on the city webpage at cityofsancarlos.org/SB9 and stay informed of the upcoming community engagement opportunities, whether via workshop or public hearings. Finally, any questions or inquiries can be sent to me, that you can find on the website at askhawk@cityofsancarlos.org. My contact information is also on the website. And then we will continue to post on social media and send out emails as public engagement opportunities are finalized. Next. So with that, we end the presentation with our recommendation of extending the urgency ordinance to establish interim regulations and objective standards for the subdivision and development of qualified SB 9 properties for a period of 10 months and 15 days. Now, staff is available for any questions, and as a reminder, Al will be delegating the questions to the appropriate staff person. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Judy. That was a great presentation. I'll open it up to my colleagues now for questions. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Judy, for the presentation. Appreciate it. And all the work that's gone in the last few weeks since we did this. I know that some communities have looked at adding affordable housing requirements for SB 9 projects. I think Millbrae was one. I think I talked to someone over there who did that. Is that something that we've looked at or considered, given the how much that affordable housing has come up as an issue of concern or of interest for the community from the survey that we saw earlier?
Judy?
Sure, I can help answer that. So when we met with the housing subcommittee, we did present some affordability, assessments, and we looked at some of the cities that you mentioned, Vice Mayor, and it was recommended that we bring up the affordability requirements as part of the permanent ordinance. So we do plan to look at this as we work on the permanent ordinance. I know I was reading through Palo Alto, like their study session that they did last year, and they were also considering some affordability requirements. The main piece when considering affordability requirements is market feasibility. So 21 Elements, they sort of cautioned when looking at affordability requirements, does it make sense for the property owner, and how hard is it to revert an affordable unit back to a regular unit if that's the way the owner wants to go. So we're going to be looking at all of those elements, and if council desire, if they want to establish affordability requirements, what that would look like and what levels.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad to know that it's something that we're looking into, and I'll be sort of watching to see how that plays out over time. Thanks.
I don't see any other hands raised, so I'll jump in with a couple of questions. I appreciate the Vice Mayor bringing up affordability requirements. Is that something that will be part of the community workshops that we'll be testing out there with the community on how they feel about, affordability requirements? And building on that, I know Burlingame looked at parking requirements and, whether or not someone could basically pave over their front yard for off-street parking. Also wondering about, I've received some questions about the rental period, if we should consider, that the rental period for these units should be more than 1 month.
Are these all kind of checklist items that will be part of the community workshops so that we can hear where the community falls on some of these extra issues?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we can look at all those topics.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. I know this came up in our last discussion, the finding language is triggering for many community members, and I'm hoping that someone can explain what is meant by the threat to public health, safety, and welfare, and kind of why that was characterized in the staff report as such.
Mr. Rubens?
Yeah, I think that'll be me. Thank you. The government code section that the city is utilizing to adopt this urgency ordinance is 65,858, and that's the precise language that is required by finding that the council must make in order to have an urgency ordinance as such as this that not only imposes interim regulations but freezes the rules if it was, for example, moratoria or any other type of a urgency ordinance. In this case, it's just imposing the interim regulations. So the staff report on the extension attempted to clarify what the intention was and why we're making the findings. It's not really that directed at any individual person. It's really the absence of objective standards in our current ordinances that we're trying to address, creating the urgency. It is not intended to address any type of housing environment that people are in. Again, this applies to the residential districts in town. It doesn't apply to the districts that already allow multifamily. So we're not really addressing that issue at all. We're just focusing on the residential areas, and that the fact that our ordinance does not really contemplate what the state has imposed on local agencies through SB 9. So I hope that answers your question. It's just really trying to address the urgency of the lack of these objective standards, and in order to apply the rules. Now, that language I understand why people feel that way, but it really is just right out of the statute. And staff believes that you can make that finding even if you're not totally in agreement with the language, but it's right out of the statute, and that's a finding that you need to make.
Thank you. With respect to protecting renters, I heard that there's some provisions in SB 9 to protect renters. Do we have a registry in the city of San Carlos? So in other words, do we happen to know where all of the rental properties are, or is it possible that there is rental properties that we are unaware of, and therefore we wouldn't be able to enforce that?
I'll try and answer that question. We don't have a list per se of all the rental properties in the city. Theoretically, it is possible that there are rental properties that we're unaware of. On the other hand, we do have a apartment rental inspection process that we go through, where we have our fire department and building officials inspect apartment buildings for building permit issues and other health and safety issues over time. We can look into how they make perhaps they do retain or have a list per se, but perhaps the fire department and building official go off a list or some known properties that they inspect.
Thank you. And then if I could just ask one more quick question, Madam Mayor, that has to do with the timing. So I heard 3 different timelines, and I see that staff is asking for a period of 10 months and 15 days, but then the timeline shows that this is ending potentially in late October. So could you help me understand what specifically duration are you asking for the extension? Because is it end of the year, December, or is it end of October?
Judy, perhaps you could clarify that question.
Yes, I can do that, Al. So with the 10.5 month extension, from today, it would take us to December 29th. But staff is proposing that we complete it earlier. So with the proposed timeline, we'll aim to complete it by a permanent ordinance by the end of October. And so when the permanent ordinance is adopted, then the urgency ordinance is no longer applicable. So we technically, under the law, would have until December 29th to adopt a permanent ordinance, but we're aiming to get it done quicker by the end of October.
So you're asking for really 8 months, then not 10 and a half months. Is that correct?
Well,
so Judy, if I could try to answer that. We'd like to have the whole 10 and a half months specifically. While we're aiming to do the ordinance faster, there is a sense of urgency. We heard it when we went to the Planning Commission. And a number of folks in the community would like to get this done quick, and perhaps the council would too. But we don't know what could happen during the public review process. There may be requests for additional information or additional research, additional public engagement or meetings. So we'd like to have the 10 months and 15 days to make sure that we have enough time.
Thank you.
I just had one more point, is the timeline. When we do a permanent ordinance, it's not effective until 30 days from the second reading. So it's actually under the schedule that's outlined in the staff report, it wouldn't be effective or replaced until November under that timeline. So it's pretty close to the full. And then we don't really have a meeting normally in December that conducts business. So I think it's one of those, I mean, we might be able to move it up a little closer, but I think experience tells us all that sometimes, as Al said, there's unanticipated issues that might affect our timeline soon. We might run into a problem with complying with getting it to you before the date expires.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from my colleagues before we open the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, we will now open the public hearing. If you'd like to make a public comment on this item, you may do so via Zoom or phone. And I'll remind our callers that there is a 2-minute timer that you can watch while you're speaking. Crystal, is there anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, I do see one member of the public, Karen Tesman. You should be able to, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, I apologize for any street noise. Thank you for taking my comments. So I'm calling in as someone who lives in a fourplex near downtown in a really beautiful area that is where multifamily just abuts single family zoned areas. And it's right around Cedar and Arroyo, that area. It's beautiful, it's peaceful, it's healthy, and it provides a model for the ways that multifamily and single family can coexist. I really urge the council and staff to expedite this process as much as possible, to not try to reinvent the wheel, and to really rely on professional standards that have been set in our existing multifamily zones, which, by the way, are residential. I heard the city manager say residential versus multifamily, and I really take exception to that. We reside in multifamily zones. So we have a lot of great existing neighborhoods to take a template off of, and there are a lot of great emerging practices and consultants and places that really specialize in missing middle housing. And, you know, the concerns people have around wanting windows to not face each other intrusively or wanting green space, these are questions that other towns have faced before us. And so I really hope that we draw on best practices that are already established elsewhere to really expedite making a solution that works for all of us. And finally, I'd just like to say that while I understand that the language is just from a statute, how you use a statute matters. The fact is that when applied to multifamily zoning, multifamily housing and single family zones, when you say public health emergency threat, what you're doing is you're creating alarm in the community, not bringing people along to your vision. And you're playing into language that has been used as racist dog whistles in the creation of single family zoning. So I understand the language itself was pulled from a book by the state, but the application of that language in this place was inappropriate, and really that needed to be said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. And there are no further hands.
Maybe I'll give it just a few more seconds before we close the public hearing, if you don't mind, just to make sure no one calls in. This is the last opportunity to speak about this issue, urgency ordinance pertaining to SB 9.
Oh, one hand did come up. Evelyn Rossi.
Hello, my name is Evelyn. I'm very nervous. This is the first time I've done anything like this, but I just wanted to say that my concern with this is, yes, we do want standards and we want our community to be beautiful and to be a healthy environment. At the same time, I'm worried that like all these standards are just a big elaborate excuse to continue to force poor people and people of color out of our community. The way I see it is if you make this housing too difficult to build, then it won't get built and we'll just like be in the same place we are now, just with this law that isn't getting used at all. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Crystal, any further hands?
No, there are no hands.
Okay, seeing no further public comment on this issue, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, with the public hearing now closed, I will open it up to council member comments and or discussion. Councilmember Palmer Lohan, I saw your hand first.
Thank you, Mayor McDowell. I just want to go back to one of the public commenters and talk about what wasn't discussed in the presentation was whether or not technical experts will be deployed on this effort with respect to objective standards. And Al, if you could help us understand kind of what is required from public comment input, as well as whether or not we'll be employing subject matter experts that understand design and objective standard creation.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we will be employing experts in this area. We have sent out a request for proposals for the creation of our objective standards. And so we have 3 firms that we're currently interviewing, and we'd like to bring that forward to the City Council, a contract in the very near future. And while components of the objective standards will look at multifamily housing as well as single family housing, we'd like those experts to focus on the single family component first so we can move it along with this, the new ordinance. And so these will, whenever you review the ordinance or standards that are adopted through your zoning ordinance, you have to have public meetings. The state of California plan requires you to go to your planning commission first, have a public forum to accept community feedback and listen to people's ideas on things. And then they would have to formally make a recommendation to the city council, and that is law. The city has to do it that way. And if our city attorney would like to weigh in on that particular issue, then he could clarify on that. So hopefully that answers those questions.
And, Madam Mayor and Council, yeah, Mr. Savay is correct. Whenever you are going to contemplate passing a change to your zoning ordinance, that requires that the Planning Commission provide you with a recommendation before you take action on that item. So yes, there's always a public process on it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm just going to say that I do support extending the emergency ordinance. This is obviously a complicated mandate. We've heard lots of good questions, lots of concerns, and people are frankly, pretty passionate about this one. And those are all strong reasons that we do it right, that we run a full public process like we would do with any complicated, important issue before us. So I'm supportive of allowing us time to do that. And I would just go on to say that, this council, this city has definitely placed housing as a top priority. We're doing strong work on housing on many fronts. And we're going to do serious work on SB 9 as well. And we're all concerned to get this one right. And we're also not going to distract on this one and continue to do good work on the other aspects of housing as we seek to upzone many aspects of our community to accommodate 2,735 new units that are required in our arena allocation. I know we're on board as a council. That's my perception. We're all on board with fully embracing that and making that happen. We do have an affordable housing shortage. It affects all of us. I know I was a renter for 5 long years in San Carlos. I understand the frustration. I'm concerned about where my 3 children will be able to live someday. I know we're all concerned about our essential workers, our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers. It's a real issue, and we're focused, and we do intend to address it. But we will also handle this SB 9 state mandate properly. The mandate made it clear that cities would have to develop standards around it. And this is really just the normal process by which cities translate mandates into workable ordinances. That's our job, and we need this time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think anybody that knows this council knows how much we all pay attention, care about the community, and want to make sure that we do the right thing. We really have 2 jobs. One is to listen to the community, and the other one is to follow the law. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The language of the urgency ordinance it's unfortunate, but it's a means to allow us to have a public process that is fair and allows the community to be engaged and make sure that we do follow the law in a fair and reasonable way that is responsive to what our community needs. So I hope people understand that, and I'm going to support extending the urgency ordinance. Thank you.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Collins, for your comments. I recognize that the finding language is offensive to many of our neighbors, and I believe it is important to note that the verbiage was a state statute. As we move forward with this discussion, I hope that we can find language that is aligned with our values and as a welcoming and inclusive community. I'd like council to consider crafting a letter to send to our state representative that documents our opposition to the finding language because it was what we had to work with. And I appreciate that it's triggering for many. I believe that the city of San Carlos is welcoming an inclusive community, especially as evidenced tonight by Mayor McDowell's opening proclamations, which I deeply appreciated. And that this council is one of the first to demonstrate a full commitment to creation of affordable housing and increasing access to childcare here in the city of San Carlos. In fact, to build on Councilmember Dugan's comments, we've directed staff to update the housing element in our strategic plan to not only meet the RHNA number allocation, but also to exceed it to keep our jobs housing ratio in line with expected commercial developments. SB 9 does allow communities to set objective standards for the construction of housing on subdivided lots. I believe it is important that we follow our best practice as a community and engage technical experts and all stakeholders, which includes the public, in the discussion to ensure that the housing stocks that are built offer a high quality of life that is consistent with our shared values and that the homes are affordable. And we give considerations to ensuring that we can manage those renter requirements, perhaps with the creation of a renter registry. It was sobering to me to learn that the most recent real estate figures show that the average cost of a single family home in San Carlos is $2.5 million. There have also been concerns expressed about our most recent urgency ordinance with the maximum 800 square feet and 16-foot maximum. We need to keep in mind the underlying economics and provide guidelines and objective standards to ensure that what's built can be done so that the housing is livable, affordable, and incentivizes the development of new homes. We have a housing crisis. We need to act accordingly. While I'm supportive of the work that the staff has undertaken, I believe that 10.5 months is too long, and I challenge the staff to drastically reduce this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. I don't see any other hands raised. I'll share some of my thoughts. I too want to thank the community for speaking up and sharing your concerns with us. In my opinion, I think what we're trying to address is ambiguity in the code, ambiguity in design standards, and also ambiguity in what our community can expect under SB 9. And I think it is our job to clear up ambiguity and set clear, objective standards for these types of development projects. And the way we figure out those standards is through engaging with our community. I think that it is our job to make sure the community has an opportunity to weigh in on these decision points that are before us. And luckily, San Carlos does an excellent job making sure everyone has a voice in changes coming to our community. We've done extensive outreach for the East Side Vision Plan. We've done extensive outreach on our housing element. So there's no reason to believe that we wouldn't do the same thing with SB 9. I do think that it's important to take time to understand where the community has concerns and then thoughtfully craft objective standards. No one is saying that we're not going to comply with SB 9. What we are saying is we're going to continue to be thoughtful leaders who seek out feedback and listen to our community and then take action where it is needed. And the community needs to have a chance to weigh in. I too support bringing in experts, and I support moving this process forward as expeditiously as possible. I watched the Planning Commission meeting when they went over this as well, and the Residential Design Review Committee member, Eugene Sakai, had a lovely quote that I thought was really important to share. And he said, "This is a difficult balance to strike, but we will have to come up with something that honors the intent of SB 9, as well as something the community can accept." So that's what I'm aiming for as well. And I intend to support extending the urgency ordinance tonight. Are there any other comments from my colleagues? Vice Mayor Beck.
Yes, I didn't want to be left out on this. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, I apologize. I should let you go last. I just want to pass on. I also appreciate all the public feedback and the emails we've received and the public comment on this. It is a complicated issue and one that we're going to work through. I look forward to furthering this discussion and hearing from, having a good process from the community and getting to an answer on what's best for our community and knowing that we are going to implement this law but do it in a way that is, I guess I would follow the mayor's quote on that, or the residential design committee members quote on that, in a way that works for San Carlos as well. So I will also be supporting this extension.
I see no further hands, so I will entertain a motion at this time.
Madam Mayor, I'll move to adopt urgency ordinance number
1578.
1578, an ordinance of the City of Council, City of San Carlos, pursuant to Government Code Section 65858B, extending urgency ordinance 1576, imposing interim regulations and objective standards for the subdivision and development of qualified Senate Bill 9 properties for a period of 10 months and 15 days.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. We will now move on to item 11, new business, consideration of adopting a resolution declaring the need for City Council and commissions to continue conducting meetings remotely pursuant to Assembly Bill 361 and discuss and provide direction on returning to in-person meetings. And here to speak about that is Crystal and Rebecca.
Actually, it's going to be me tonight.
Okay.
We made a change last minute this evening. So thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. The AB 361 resolution before you is a resolution you've seen now quite a number of times, but it's been on your consent calendar for a number of months now, as it's just been sort of a routine action to continue it so we can continue to hold remote meetings. This evening, we moved it to new business, not so much for you to talk about the AB 361 portion, but because we're aware that state and county mask mandates are changing, set to take effect this coming Wednesday, and masks will no longer be required, though they are still recommended in many circumstances. So we thought we would put this on the agenda to check in with you about whether or not you were ready to resume in-person meetings as a council and with the community, or if you wanted to postpone for some time yet. If you do want to go forward, the earliest we'd be capable of having everything back up and running in the chambers would be the first meeting in March. So the second Monday of March would be the soonest. And if you'd like to continue on, obviously we're already set with our public Zoom meeting process, and we have that pretty down pat. So we'll just continue on. If you do elect to resume in-person meetings, I would recommend that you still adopt the AB 361 resolution. It's being adopted under the governor's emergency declaration ordinance in California. So as long as that's in effect, I'd recommend that you continue to adopt the ordinance, just because we've seen so many sudden changes in requirements and recommendations from the state and the county health officials on this. And if without it in place, if we had resumed to in-person meetings and something changed, we might have to then cancel a meeting and not be able to have a in-person meeting until we have worked out the issues of getting our AB 361 resolution back before you. So that's all I have for you this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And as you said at the beginning, Rebecca and Crystal are here as well if we need any additional help.
Thank you, Jeff. I'll open it up to questions. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, just a quick one. So what's before us is whether we resume live meetings or in the council chamber. Jeff, is our reading of the change in the mask mandate, is that like if we did choose to meet live, would we continue to wear, would we be required to wear masks in that setting? Do we know that yet?
You would have to provide proof of vaccination. And if you provided proof of vaccination, you would not have to wear a mask. So during in-person meetings, obviously for the staff and the city council, we could do kind of a one-time verification. And then we'd be required at the staff level to check vaccination cards or require masks be worn by the public to be able to attend in person.
Okay, and then if we approve this tonight, we could still choose to meet in council chamber. This just gives us the option to not do so, right?
Right. I mean, AB 361 gives you you have to have that in place to be able to meet remotely. And so we just thought it was a good time to check in with you about where you're at on in-person meetings.
But we could approve this and then yet still decide to meet in chamber, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks, Jeff, for the update on that. When you talk about proof of vaccination status, can you just clarify, are we talking about what's the current state of being, or what's sort of the view from the county maybe of being fully vaccinated? Do you need to have a booster, or is it just you have the 2 shots, or so what's the state of that? Do we know that?
I believe it's the 2 shots. I don't think it requires the booster. And if I'm incorrect, Rebecca could jump in and tell me, but I think that's accurate.
Okay. And then in terms of us meeting, so let's say if we were to go back in person at either the date suggested or another date, if can we operate in a way where, if one of the council members or, ended up getting COVID or were close contact, sort of the day before or something happened, then obviously we may want to, use caution around that. Having this AB 361 in place, would that allow us also to have sort of say, 4 of us on the dais and 1 being able to participate remotely?
Yes, AB 361 would allow you to do that. And there's also pre-existing conditions of the law that allow for council members to be at a remote location. In the past, it's often come up if a council member was traveling out of the area the same night as a council meeting. There are different posting requirements. So there's 2 different paths to be able to achieve that.
Okay. And then as I understood it, sort of if you had with having the 361 in place, as I think as Councilmember Dugan pointed out, we can still go back in person, but if we needed to pivot quickly or and go back remote because of the situation changing, we could do that because we sort of have continued to approve the AB 361 rules.
That's correct. AB 361, if you approve the resolution again, it doesn't require that you meet remotely. It just allows you to meet remotely. So you always have the option of, as long as you're in compliance with the state and health guidelines of holding public meetings.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. I'll save my comments for later. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I have 2 questions if no one else has any. Jeff, with our current setup in the chambers, if someone is, homesick or traveling, do they call in by telephone, or are we set up to have them Zoom in and have a screen? And what is our current technology set up in the chambers?
I think it's primarily been phone-based in the past, but I believe we do now have the capability to have to bring somebody up on screen, like in Zoom, if you were talking right now, to have your face visible. And it's even likely that we can have, maybe through additional equipment or laptops, you'd be in person and Zooming sort of at the same time as need be.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're all pretty used to Zoom. So if you're home with a sick child or something, I think that, you'd still want to see the presentations and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, we'd obviously, I think from the staff perspective, prefer to have everybody all together in one venue or the other, just to cut down on the technology confusion and that sort of thing. But to the extent that, one person is out because they're sick and quarantined or because they have to travel for business or personal reasons, that's something that we've always worked hard to try to accommodate. And that tended to be for just one meeting at a time.
Right. Okay. And then my second question is, have you or staff received any complaints from the public about us being on Zoom? And I mean, my personal experience, it seems to more people are participating than ever, but I'm wondering if you've heard any negative feedback about us being remote.
No, I haven't received or heard from staff that we've received any comments from the public about, a demand to go back to in-person meetings. It certainly is true that we have had more public comment and public participation at meetings than we typically would in person. In fact, you can probably recall quite a few meetings in the council chambers where either we had nobody other than staff members and consultants present in person or just one or two people.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any other questions on this topic at this time? Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Yeah, so just what I'm trying to wondering about is like what is the kind of the will of the public. So I know that staff has modified counter hours, and City Hall is open a few days a week, and then it's closed another couple of days a week. Have you received any feedback about kind of in-person accessibility, and or have you heard of members of the community, wanting to come back into public chambers at this point in time? I'm thinking about the fact that we're kind of still in the middle of Omicron, and while it's maybe peaked in the county, it's still, it's still out there. So any feedback that we've received from members of the public on this?
No, we have not received any negative feedback along those lines.
Or otherwise interest in wanting more accessibility in person at this point?
No, we have not. I think there's been a rare example where somebody has wanted to come to City Hall on a day it was closed to public, but that's been very, very rare. And I think in most instances, City Hall's not closed, it's just closed to the public on those days. And we've been able to work with individuals to make sure that their needs were getting met and those services were being provided. Much of the reason that people come to City Hall during business hours is to deal with permits and applications. That's primarily what our in-person business is. In public works and community development, and the technology and systems that we've deployed over we've had for a number of years, but we've really made robust the last couple of years during the COVID pandemic, have, I think, made it easier for folks to do that work remotely from their home, so that when they forget a form or need an additional piece of information, it's not an additional trip home. It's just, running into the kitchen or the office to grab that piece of information as you fill out and file your permit or do follow-up. So it's worked pretty well for us, and I think the public too. And we have gotten a number of comments from folks that they like those changes and that additional accessibility and flexibility that's being provided them.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands raised. I'll open it up to public comment, and then we can have our discussion time. Crystal, is there anyone waiting in the waiting room?
No, there are no hands up.
Okay. Well, we'll open it up to discussion now, and I'm looking forward to hearing where everybody stands on this. Councilmember Collins.
my only comment is that I'm willing to follow the will of the council. I go back to in-person meetings at any time. I'm okay with Zoom. Whatever the majority of the council wants, I'm happy to go along with. I'm fully vaccinated, so I don't have any worries there. So I'd be interested to know what everybody else thinks.
Thank you, Ron. We'll move over to Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I guess I feel the same way. I mean, I think we should approve this evening. I understand that just gives us the flexibility to continue to meet by Zoom or to meet live when we decide we're comfortable. Personally, I'm comfortable and looking forward to being in council chambers. But I also hope we can preserve the flexibility of using Zoom for greater public accessibility. It's been nice hearing from all the folks we've been able to hear from that way. And I do know, roughly once a year, I might well need to attend by Zoom. So I like that we can continue that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So to start out, would support obviously this extending AB 361. I do like the flexibility part of this. And I guess I'm sort of where Ron is on this, so I'd like to, I'm flexible, but I do see the desire to kind of get back in person. I think that would be nice, but my preference would be to wait a little while before we did that, because I guess I'd hate to have us sort of go back in person and then the mask mandate's been dropped and the cases rise all of a sudden, and then we're back to going back and forth. So I'd like to sort of wait a little while to see if things are truly stabilized before we were sort of to make that decision.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me, what I really want is for COVID to go away. That would be ideal. And I'm feeling really ambivalent about this right now, because I'm just not seeing that a lot of people want to get together at this moment in time because of the Omicron variant, and we don't know what's around the corner. So I think what I'm hearing is suggested maybe by Vice Mayor Rack is that we go ahead and approve this, and it also extends the video conferencing, but maybe set a date out in the future, to see if the Omicron variant really does subside and it's, things settle a little bit and we kind of return back to normal. But I'd be concerned about going back and forth as well. I think that would also be a challenge for staff and all that kind of good stuff. But from a timing perspective, it's just so hard to, figure out when that's going to be. That's the struggle I feel like I'm having. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer Lohan. I had a follow-up question for Jeff. You need staff needs a 30-day runway for us to give you a heads up that we're ready to return. Is that correct? Or a 2-week runway?
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to have one meeting between when you tell us you want to come back and when we come back. There's no chairs in the council chambers currently. There's work that needs to be done, and we want to test all the systems and make sure everything's working. We're going to obviously be, doing more than we have in the past, and it would just be, and we'd like to give folks a heads up, the community a heads up, time for them to know that we're going to have in-person meetings, time for the staff to know all that. Sometimes there are childcare issues and things staff need to arrange for the late Monday evenings that we're at City Hall. So having just a sort of, skip one meeting to have that heads up to know that that's where we're going would be helpful. If it's critical, we can make it work, but it would be nice to have.
Okay, thank you. Ron, I'll call on you in just a second. I wanted to kind of chime in. I don't feel like we've been any less effective by Zoom. In fact, I feel like we've been really effective as a council and as a staff. I'm really proud of everything that the city has accomplished during the pandemic. And again, I feel like we've had a lot of public participation and I've received 0 comments from the public, pressuring us to go back. So I'm as someone who's still recovering from COVID, I still have a cough. I guess I'm following the more conservative camp. I'm still getting weekly notices from my children's school about exposures. So I know that Omicron is still in our community and, it's still here. And I take Jeff's point that I think staff, deserves a month of lead time to get childcare figured out. I am concerned about our volunteer commissioners. If we go back in person, that affects their schedules too, where they will probably have to go back in person. And, I know that some of our commissioners have very young children and our youngest children haven't had the opportunity to get vaccinated yet. I think that there's still a lot of issues that we need to kind of think through and be very sensitive to in making this decision. It's just not the 5 of us, it's all of our staff in one room, it's our commissioners. And I agree with Councilmember Palmer Lohan that, it doesn't seem like people are gathering a lot right now. And maybe now that we're loosening up the mask mandate, maybe we should see where things fall. So, I would be willing to push this off and revisit it again in early April. But I'm throwing that out as an idea and, would welcome input from my colleagues. Okay, so Councilmember Collins had his hand up first, and then I'll go to you, John.
Thank you. You just extended the life of a fly for a few more seconds. It was on my desk. Jeff, I'm just curious. I'm not suggesting that we do this, but if we wanted to, could we set a date future, like, I don't know, I'm just going to pick a date. First meeting in June as a tentative to go back and then revisit it. Would that provide any benefit for the staff? Or do we just not need to do it because we can decide whenever we want as long as we give you 30 days notice? You're muted.
The answer to both of those questions is yes. You can do that. You could pick, a date, in the future, and that would be the date with the proviso that the governor's order stays in effect that long. If the governor's order is repealed, then you no longer have the ability to do it. And we'd have to come back unless something was done at the state level to replace that. You have the ability now, you've had the ability all along to have meetings in public, so that doesn't change. You can decide to do that at any time, even if you create a date certain and then, a month from now you feel like, that's too far out or not far enough out. You change it and you could come back or you could push it out. So you have a lot of flexibility here as a council.
Yeah. Okay. And after hearing all the comments, I'm kind of the mind that we don't go back in person until all 5 of us want to go back in person. I think that would be my preference. It's kind of an all or nothing. That's it. That's all I had.
Thanks, Ron. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Ron, and thank you, Mayor McDowell. I agree. We've been very effective by Zoom, and I agree with Ron. I mean, it's the only thing I feel strongly about here is we shouldn't go back to regular meetings until we're all comfortable and that Jeff feels that, the majority of staff is just fine with it as well. We've been, just as effective as I think we've needed to be by Zoom, so there's no reason to rush it. So I would suggest we approve this evening, and I appreciated the mayor's comment that maybe we pencil in our first meeting in April to revisit this.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. I appreciate Mayor McDowell's comments with respect to many members of our community still are not vaccine eligible. and that creates a vulnerability. And so until the coast is clear, and hopefully that will be soon, that I would appreciate the opportunity to revisit this in April as well.
Okay, that sounds like 3 votes. Any other further discussion on this? Vice Mayor Rack?
Oh, I'm fine with that. And I think Mayor Dodd, I think you suggested May, but I'm happy with whatever we decide is fine to wait and then revisit in a month or 6 weeks or 2 months.
All right. Madam Mayor, I move to adopt resolution 2022-17. A resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos renewing its declaration on the need for City Council and commissions to continue conducting meetings remotely pursuant to Assembly Bill 361.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Jeff, do you feel clear on the council's direction?
I do, Madam Mayor. We'll put this exact same agenda item on in April when you need to, do the monthly renewal of AB 361 and also give you the opportunity to discuss the future of in-person meetings.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Oh, yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. I just want to say I'm so thankful to be on such a nice, understanding council, and everybody got to say their piece tonight. So thank you for being gracious. Okay, we will move on to item 12, agenda setting. I don't see anything listed. Does anyone have something to bring up tonight? Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just say that I was surprised to hear the lack of stoves at the Walnut housing project. So not really an agenda item, but I would just say I would like a tour of that if that's available, or if the city could facilitate that. I don't know if all of us should be there at the same time or not. I'll let Jeff wrestle with that. But I personally would like to go take a look at that.
Thank you, John. Since this was brought up spontaneously during our meeting, I too am disappointed to hear this. And this isn't something that I was expecting. So I think we agreed before that council would receive a report out from Jeff or staff. I agree with Councilmember Dugan. I'm very concerned about this lack of a basic amenity. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
I'm aligned. I was surprised as well. I'd like to understand the why behind it and see if there's an opportunity to consider something different.
I would add my voice in that, and I would just to echo that former Mayor Palmer Lohan, how is that Council Member Palmer Lohan's thoughts around. I'd like to understand what can be done about it too, if this is truly the case, and then I'd like to understand how we rectify it. Thank you.
Jeff, I see your video is on. Did you have something a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that we are going to be getting the answers to those questions. We'd be happy to arrange tours. There's Brown Act issues, so you can't do it all together, but we're familiar with the process, and we'll send out invitations to all 5 of you. If you're interested, and we'll get back to you with the answer to what's up with the stove issue and the whys and why fors, and if there's anything we can do to remedy it.
Okay, fair enough. Any other comments under agenda setting? Okay, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, staff. Take care, everyone. Stay well. This meeting is adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
All right, thank you.